Morning all. Let's continue our look at the most brilliant moves of all time. Now this is just I'm just also applying my subjective opinion, and I thought this was particularly brilliant, and it's been chosen by a few people as in their opinion the most brilliant, one of the most brilliant moves they've seen. So here in a simplified endgame, okay, black's materially 2 pawns up, but it's opposite coloured bishops. So potentially black has drawing chances. Also, you know, if he could set up, say, a blockade with his king on e3 and the bishop on d4, then it would seem, you know, this pawn would be blocked and this pawn is going nowhere. You know, it will be guarded on a1, so it will be difficult for black to make progress. Okay, now here actually Alexei Shirov, who's also his games have been often dubbed with fire on board, meaning, you know, he creates fire on the board, you know, tactical complications. He plays sometimes the most imaginative, creative moves, and here was no exception. So an ordinary continuation, I think most people would consider, would be just moving the bishop, you know, somewhere like maybe bishop d3. But then, you know, there's a problem. You know, the king comes out to e4, then f6 is going to drop, and then there's a problem after that. If f6 drops, then there's a 2-to-1 pawn majority to contend with. Okay, so how does black get his king into the game here, you know, without worrying about this pawn and the pawn majority capability? Well, all these problems seem to be solved by an ultra deep move in this position, and you can either pause the video now or we'll just use the 30 seconds which I'll give for you to have a look at this position. I think it's going to be impossible for me to remove the arrows so I can try and restore some of the square colours anyway. So hopefully without too much distraction you will soon be able to sort of look at the position. Okay, so 30 seconds starting from now with black to move. Okay, if you had moved any of your pawns, well, this one would be dropping anyway. You can't move that one, but you could have considered moving that. But it's really covered by this bishop, so unless you've got a winning plan involving the king, this is tricky. There's a totally radical solution Alexei Shirov chose, which is just absolutely startling the first time you see it. If you haven't seen it before, you know, prepare to be startled. He actually played bishop h3, just giving up the entire bishop. Okay, it makes it more efficient to go to f5 in one move, but arguably, you know, most sane people, or normal people rather, in chess would just move the bishop to be able to play king f5, not give the bishop up on h3. So what is this doing, this move? Well, first of all, white really, I think, doesn't want to play the move g3, because that's putting more pawns on the same colour, and there's a classical rule that you shouldn't put pawns on the same colour as your bishop. So here you see that would give black, you know, g3 as a target, which might assist more easily winning the position 2 pawns up. So he doesn't really want to play g3. Okay, and if he ignores it, maybe, you know, black is going to sack the bishop for the pawn. I mean, if he's going to play bishop h3, then Alexei judges something about white's pawns here, that they're actually more important to sort of remove as a past pawn creating device than the actual bishop here, because really, you know, there's 2 pawns up for black, and bishops are not very good observationally at stopping past pawns. So this is kind of analogous to an endgame we saw recently, a startling endgame where Magnus Carlsen managed to draw with Kramnik, where Kramnik had an extra bishop, and it was again this scenario with this dangerous outside pass pawn. So this seems to be, you know, an occasionally occurring theme of the bishop not being a brilliant defender in endgames against passed pawns, sometimes overstretched, especially when there's more than one passed pawn like there is in this scenario. So Veselin, he took the bishop, so he's crippled his potential for later more easily creating a passed pawn. This pawn now is able to restrain both of these guys. Okay, so they're doubled. You really want to avoid double pawns. But, okay, how does Alexei prove his concept? He makes use of that f5 square now. Okay. And he's very rapidly, with that, you know, king f5, getting in potentially now to d3. Or is he? You know, is the white king just able to guard? Well, the white king does step in here. And now Alexei plays king e4. So he's offering up f6, but without these passed pawns being, you know, connected, they can't easily play for h5 now to create the outside passed pawn. White would need to try and, you know, keep the balance. So here, if white doesn't take the opportunity for bishop takes f6 and plays king e2 to guard the d3 square, then, you know, maybe f5, and then there's 3 passed pawns without concern of white creating the passed h pawn, and the bishop would really start to be, you know, overloaded. You know, maybe this pawn can come down, you know, to f3 later, and then force king d3 anyway if the king's forced to go back to f2. And once that happens, can this bishop really cope with these two guys? So maybe Veselin detects he's got some slight problems here, especially given that king d3 is now playable. Okay, so he plays bishop takes f6, but now instead of king d3, Alexei actually blocks the bishop so it can't retreat back. So he's allowing white to seemingly set up the move king e2, which might be handy in some lines, but he's making the bishop struggle now to return back to try and guard against the immediate a3, a2, a1. So the bishop goes to e7, but now king d3 is used. So Alexei has gained something very important, 2 things very important from his super brilliant move, which, by the way, at a very high depth, at first I thought it was technically inaccurate, but yesterday I discovered, you know, it's verified. It's actually one of, you know, it's probably the best move in the position, bishop h3. It's just an amazing, you know, horizon depth for an engine to be able to see this clearly. Okay, so maybe there is some bias in engines about giving up material in such a manner, conceptually, you know, crippling the potential to create a passed pawn and getting the king very active are 2 concepts here combined together. Okay, so the king on d3 is now assisting, you know, quite aggressively these pawns. You know, if it can go to c2 next, then it will facilitate d3, d2, d1. So bishop c5. Now here, okay, king c2 is prevented, and, you know, maybe king c3 can be considered, but actually this next move just chases the bishop, king c4. Okay, so the bishop retreats over there, and now we see king b3. Okay, now here I think black has just essentially won a tempo now, because, well, in this position actually Veselin Topalov resigned. Let's see, if the king, you know, tried to defend, then I believe that, that king c2 is going to be strong. But maybe here, just to avoid embarrassment, I'm going to turn on an engine just to make sure, absolutely sure. So king e1, king c2, yes. Okay, so we want to guard the queening square. And now, say bishop b4. there's overloading, because d3, what is white doing here? There's no potential, you see, to counter-attack, to create an outside past h pawn. So without that, white's spectating now after d2. He has to give up the bishop, and of course this a2, this a pawn would win. So okay, let's try a different move here. Let's try bishop c5 again, given it was tried on the previous go. d3, king e3, king c2, so immediate threat d2, bishop b4. And now here, I think either move wins. Either a3 wins, because the bishop, if it takes, then d2, or just d2 wins as well, because then a3. There's no returning back on this diagonal to get on this diagonal to stop the a pawn. The a pawn's winning here. Okay, so that's amazing. But was that really accuracy, you might ask, then here needed after in this continuation? Why was the bishop kicked back here with king c4? Well, actually, this was an accurate move as well here, it seems, because if king c3, then white actually gets an advantage here, because king e2, and you see the point here is, if d3, then king d1, and now black is in real trouble with this king really safely blockading the d pawn. So say king b3, king d2, you know, if a3, then there's always bishop a3 and king d3. So this is a very, very different scenario. So there's some magic here in this chasing the bishop away with king c4. King c4 might actually, it's the only way to proceed. Once the bishop's kicked back, then we saw king b3. You see, the king, with this king b3, is very quickly getting to c2, because now if we try and set up the blockade with king e1, as we saw before, then here after king e1, there's the move king c2, so it stops the white king getting to that d1 square. So this d3 d2 is all the more effective. So this was important, this to kick the bishop back, to be able to then go like this to stop the white king getting to d1. So these two passed pawns are really totally maximized in this scenario. Amazing stuff, really. Let's go back to to see this shocking piece sacrifice. So in this position, king g1 had just been played, and then there was this shocking bishop h3. So it is a real shock. Bishop h3. And let's now look just more briefly again. If g3, then king f5, and white really didn't want to put pawns on dark squares. So this infiltration here, say we give up, say taking that a3, then the bishop has to try and stop the pawn. But in this position now, bishop g4, it's been the bishop's good as well as this pawn, these pawns being more vulnerable. And say we reach this scenario, then again, this is helpless for white. The passed pawn potential has been destroyed in this scenario as well. So in here, basically, black is forcing one of the pawns through. Now d2, and be forcing pawn through. The bishop's just no good at dealing with passed pawns, really, especially two passed pawns on quite distant files. So that was that one. But in the game, Veselin took that bishop, showing the impact fully of the concept of giving up a whole piece to get this active king and maximize these two passed pawns. So d4, bishop e7 was tried. Because now with d4, you know, this bishop's been blocked from a1, so if king e1, you might ask, then there's the very fast a3. The bishop's not getting back in time, can't get into this diagonal to stop a1. So in the game, the bishop had to go back to e7, and then this king d3. So the king really wants to get to c2, but it wants to get to c2 without losing d4. So taking a step back to go forward here, so kicking the bishop back, it doesn't want to lose d4, but still wants to get to c2. So now king b3, so he's still getting to c2 without losing the pawn. And here, you know, if bishop c5, then there's d3. Again, the king's able to get to c2 to herd this guy. So this is all winning now from this position when played very, very accurately. Okay, brilliant concept. Hope you enjoyed that. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.